What's up everybody, I hope you're well. I'm making this video because there isn't a lot of information online on how to go from your mockup to a full orchestral score with the parts and everything. And obviously it's a very long process and it can take a very long time to, prepare all the scores and the parts for the players. And I'm not gonna show you everything today, but I at least want to show you guys what are some of the fundamental steps that you would take. Okay, so first of all, once you're done making the mockup, you basically end up with a huge mess like what I have here at the moment. As you know, if you're like me, I don't quantize and CSS, and you have to compensate for CSS different legato speeds. So that's going to be a problem later on. So the very first thing you want to do is basically merge all the MIDI regions together and maybe delete all the stuff that you are not gonna be using. So there's a quick shortcut here in Logic. You can do Control A and then press the J button on the keyboard. You can select exclude and you end up having something like this. What I like to do oftentimes is just take it the extra step and put, all the instruments, like for example, horn 1, horn 2, 3, and 4 on the same MIDI region. And also if you have some doublings across different libraries and stuff like that, you're going to want to make sure that they all sit on the same region, because that's going to help you a great deal later on when you're exporting to XML. You can have anything you want in the insert because we're not going to use this, and I'm going to show you later on how we're going to get some sound. And you're going to want to repeat the process for basically all the instruments, like I'm doing here with the trumpets. And once you're done merging everything together, it's going to look a little bit like this. And just like magic, everything is neatly organized and sitting on the same regions, including the doubles, flute doubles, A2, and horns, A4, etc. Now, let's open the violin region, violin 1. What you're going to want to do now is basically make sure that you quantize everything. I mean, if the piece is kind of vary in articulations and kind of rhythmic subdivisions and all that, quantizing is not going to work. It's going to be a big mess because you probably have several different subdivisions. But what I personally do is kind of do it manually. Like, I would go through each phrase and just double check that they're sitting, in the right place, like so. Just moving them, nudging them a little bit. And also you can quickly check in the score how that will look, because this is the basic look that you're going to get once you export the MIDI into XML. So you might want to look for these kind of spots, like this, for example. That seems to be a weird kind of rhythm. So what you can do now that it's selected, just go into the MIDI, into the piano roll, and fix that and see if it's going to look any better. So this is quite clearly 8s, supposed to be 8s, right? You see what's happening? This moved back, but it was supposed to move forward. So yeah, just making sure that everything is sitting where it's supposed to be. And now as we go back to the score, hopefully it should look a little bit better. And this part of the process can take a very long time, but it's definitely worth putting the time in, because once you're going to, move to Sibelius or Finale or whatever kind of notation software you use, ideally you wouldn't want to change any of the note durations and the rhythms or, note values and all these kinds of things, and only really add articulations and dynamics and expression markings such as slurs and stuff like that. There will be things that you will need to do manually, such as runs and things that don't really translate well in Logic score editor or are harder to tweak in the score editor in Logic than, you know, any other notation software. So I would recommend that you leave those out, you know, just leave them as they're written and kind of manually re-input them in. Also, there will be parts like this, like, you know, these little runs and kind of moving lines that are not necessarily idiomatic for the orchestra, you know. So you're going to want to fix the orchestration to be playable for real players once you're making the score. Like, for example, this part on the woodwinds, you're going to want them, you know, dovetailing from the first player to the second one. And this is not, I mean, there's no other way to do this other than just do it manually. So I don't think it's worth spending time, you know, tweaking the score here in Logic just to make it perfect. So once all that is done, you're going to want to select everything, open the score editor window, and then go to File, Export, Score as XML. The problem we have at the moment, though, is that if we need to reference something, you know, just maybe hear a line or a particular passage, we're not going to be able to do that, obviously. So what you can do at this stage is go back into the Mockup project and export all the stems into, you know, the MIDI cleanup project if you haven't done it already. So let me do that very quickly. Now, something you can do is if you want to be able to solo tracks and just mute them and all that, what you can do is basically put, you know, the audio tracks on the same group as the MIDI tracks. So let me show you how to do that on the harp, for example. Let's put the harp on group 1. Yes. And basically put the MIDI harp on group 1 as well. And now if we solo that, we should be able to hear it. Exactly. Because it's basically, you know, soloing both tracks at the same times. One quick last little thing that can make your life a little bit easier, you know, when you're reading MIDI notes of Logic, of the piano roll, is basically adding a note label on top of, you know, the MIDI notes. The way you do this in Logic is by going to View, then Note Labels. Yes, and now you have the note names popping up on basically all the notes. So we're basically done with this part. Now we can open up the XML into Sibelius and see how that looks like. So as you can see, it's still a big mess. And there's still quite a lot of work to be done before, you know, just having the score ready. And first of all, let's just, you know, in order to, you know, make this a little bit more readable, let's reduce the staff size. Yes, something like this. Let's just we can try to optimize the space. Yes, like so. Deleting things that are not necessary. That happens when, you know, you have the wrong settings on a said instrument in Logic. So you're going to want to make sure that, for example, here in the score, as you can see, you have both the treble and the bass clef. You're going to want to make sure to have the correct clef for, you know, for said instrument. Like, for example, the flute should be only the treble clef. And that obviously is going to save quite a bit of time because you don't have to delete anything later on. So just, you know, little things like this when you're doing the MIDI cleanup in Logic are going to be extremely helpful later on when you're making the score, because obviously you don't have to spend as much time in it. So yeah, if we go back to the XML, I also recommend, I don't know why this happens, but sometimes, you know, I have all the instruments, you know, named as choir. I believe it's because of the MIDI channel they're assigned to, but obviously changing all the names and just making sure that everything matches correctly. Once that's done, you're still going to be a pretty long way, particularly because, you know, we still don't have any dynamics or expressions or any of that, but also the formatting is a big mess, and I wouldn't recommend that you work on the score straight into this project. Something much more efficient, in my opinion, is importing, copying and pasting some of this stuff into a pre-made template. I like to use my own template, so let me open that up and I'll show you guys. All right, now, so here's my template. What I like to do is just put it on the left and leave, the cleanup on the right. Also, the logic session can be pretty handy sometimes, so I like to just, put that on the right as well. Just close this and then select, the windows that you want to work in. So now that that's ready, you can start just, copying and pasting some of the parts. So yeah, just, select the line that you want to have, copy, then paste. Easy. It's already looking a little bit better, isn't it? Simply because the formatting is now correct. Let's do violin 2. Let's do the violas. And why not? Let's do the basses and cellos as well. This is looking all right, but obviously we don't have any of the dynamics or the articulations or any of that. So you're going to want to just, type those in and basically assign all the instruments to the correct articulations. Like, for example, those were measured tremolos. So I would just go ahead and do that. And same for the tremolos on violas. And having the logic, project is useful sometimes when you have some doubts. Like, for example, here on violas, I see that we have some weird kind of, like, we have one note on the first bar, and then all the other parts have basically 2 notes. So I would basically just go in, the logic session and check what happened for that specific spot, and basically correct those, add notes where they're needed. And here's a little pro tip: when you have a long note here, like for example, like this D, you're going to want to split this. Otherwise, it's not going to show up in the score editor, and it's not going to show up in the MIDI XML either. So let me show you what it looks like now. Now it's going to look like a dyad, essentially. While before it didn't. I can Command Z. You see it's not showing up. So essentially, you're going to want to go through the whole score, and that's going to help a great deal later on when you are basically copying and pasting stuff from the XML into your Sibelius template, because you basically won't have stuff like this, one note that would be leaving you wondering whether it was meant to be like that, or it was meant to be 2 notes, and so on. And also, of course, super important, just checking all the accidentals, And hopefully, after a long time, your score is going to look a little bit like this. Et voila! I really wish it would take a split second, like you show this popping up on your screen right now, to make a full score like this. It really does, and it takes a very long time. And once you're done with the full score, it's just a matter of creating parts for the players, because this is the conductor score. And now you basically need to make the scores for, each single player. And Sibelius does it automatically. Let's open. If I open violin 1, this is the part that violin 1 players get. Obviously, this is being formatted already. But the parts are being made automatically. And it's just a matter of, making sure that you have page turns happening in the right places, and making sure that everything looks good and is kind of readable. The way I like to write for woods and brass is by having them sharing the stave, a couple of instruments sharing the stave. But generally speaking, when you're making parts, you're going to want to have individual parts for each player. So basically have one part for flute 1, one part for flute 2, and so on. So basically, in other words, you don't want to write divisi on the score when they're taking chords. And that's just a general kind of rule of thumb when you're writing for orchestra. And extracting parts like this can be a little bit of a problem, you know, when if you're working in Sibelius, because if you were to isolate, for example, horn 1 and 2, you still get, you know, the two instruments together. So what you can do is basically duplicate these staves and basically copy and paste this part onto them and delete some of the notes that you don't need and the markings that you don't need, like for example A2 or soli or whatever you need to do for the conductor. So let me show you what that would look like. This looks like a big mess now because I've already done it, and there's a bunch of extra scores and the formatting doesn't really work anymore. There's a pretty handy function in Sibelius, which is here in the hide or show. If you, like, let's say for the 4-horn parts, right now is only showing up in the parts, but if I select show in score, they're going to show up, you know, over here as well. And basically, once you're done pasting the notes onto their own single stave, what you can do is basically select all the parts that you don't need in the full score and just select show in parts. Now basically these parts are hidden, and if you select everything by clicking 3 times, go to layout and hide empty staves, and basically just like magic, all the parts are now hidden from the full score and only showing up in the parts. All right, guys, so that's it. That was my process for going from, you know, the MIDI mockup to a full score and, you know, preparing parts for the orchestra. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope this was useful, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.